How's it going so far? When I was asked to come on this panel, I spent a few sleepless nights thinking about, firstly, what I was going to say, and then why was I even in the room. And I just have to take a fanboy moment, because I remember being, as many of you will, being many years ago, watching the New Zealand Wars documentary come on TV. I'd already read Titiro Waru, so Matua Belich, it's an honour for me to be here with you, but actually not just you, sir. There's an amazing selection of people here today that have a huge amount of knowledge that I feel like I benefit from, but we benefit from each other in terms of our experience. Dr. O'Malley and your wife's taken off for the best part, I see, so sweet. You can fill her in. So I also want to acknowledge the beginning of my journey in the New Zealand Wars really was in Tauranga and Matua Bari Makairi there. We're sort of doing a little bit more work on the future of telling that story and other stories in Tauranga. And from there, Anne Blythe from the Auckland Museum gave me the opportunity to begin my museum education career. So mihi to all of you people today, and those of you who I don't know, and other friends. After this, they may disavow that people met me. So my role is to talk about what works for young people. Just nod, David, here. And I just have to kind of say that I'm not an expert at all, but like most museum educators and people who carry the story, you go into that space trying to prepare as much as you can with all the weight on your shoulders of what you realise you carry. You carry, teacher expectations, but really, and the music expectations of your employer, but you also really, 100% of the time you're just thinking, how do I honour the people who the story is about? How do I honour the people who have suffered the most? And try and do that in a professional way, but also in a human way. And that's a real challenge. And I've made my mistakes and I've had some successes. So out of those experiences, I guess I'd just like to offer you some thoughts about that. The first thing is dealing with language. And what works with our young people, some frankness and authenticity and vulnerability. Even the name, the New Zealand Wars, to me is really clinical. It's a real kind of, this is a chapter in history that we must deal with. We must do a good job and we must be honourable. But actually, it would be much more honest for us to talk to our young people in a way that actually says something about these stories. We should call it our brokenness, our darkest hour, because I don't know about the stories you're reading, but the stories that I have been immersed in over the years, these are horrible stories. And, you don't relay all of that stuff in detail to a class of intermediate kids, but you're honour bound. Once you know that knowledge, you become responsible to share that in a way that allows young people to understand or to find some understanding. And part of that authenticity is about allowing the story to soak into you as well in an appropriate way. I'm not tangata whenua, I'm Cook Islands Māori and Pākehā. On both sides of my family, we have stories relating to the 1800s, especially my settler family. And on both sides, in my settler family alone, there are people who contributed to the marginalisation of people of Taranaki and people of the Whanganui, and people who also sought to get in the way of colonial plans. So it's we all carry something into the space. So it's really good for us to realise who we are in those stories and assess our biases, but also our strengths, and also be honest about when that becomes pain for us. And it does. You can't get into these stories without feeling something. If you do, then I don't know if I'd want to stay in the role of being a transmitter or a bridge. And when you know a lot, when you're not Māori, you become powerful. Someone's ringing me, sorry. Some power comes with that, some authority. And that's a really, really challenging place to be, because at that moment, you inadvertently could be in, it's really possible to recolonize the story for yourself. So as much as possible, in terms of that, when I'm talking about authenticity, I'm always trying to talk about tupuna who went through these things. Not just tupuna Māori, tupuna Pākehā, who went through these things, and try and represent them as best as I can. There's some good news and bad news, I think, about working with young people. Do you want to hear the bad news first?
Yeah.
I like to lead with the bad news, because then you can kind of do some good news. The bad news is we won't be it soon. Those of us who are in the room who are 40 and 50, soon we won't be listened to in our culture. And we're in really privileged positions to be able to advance and take advantage of the time we are. I don't feel like I've been in a time that's more charged with opportunity, because we're in a space and time in Aotearoa where we are decolonising in a way that we haven't before, and you can tell that by some of the resistance. Do you know what I mean? There's a real rise in people who just don't want to acknowledge the past or deal with this stuff. So that makes our job really, really interesting, I think, especially when you're dealing with young people around that. And there's a lot of sensitivities around that, but one thing that I would like, and Nigel has stolen some of my thunder, is which he's prone to do, as those of you know him.
It was mine anyway.
What works for young people? The moment you say the word history, I didn't say the good news, eh? So the bad news is we'll be dead soon. And when I say dead, I don't mean that we will pass away and we'll be in the ground. We won't be listened to. Our voices will dim. So what that means is that we should be sharply focused on how we hand this story to young New Zealanders. The moment I say welcome to the history of this, young people's eyes roll back in their head as though they're having some sort of reaction. But the moment I say, who'd like to hear a story? They lean in cautiously, especially secondary school students will be, I'm not really fussed. You know, because they don't want to expose themselves as actually being interested. But the moment you say to young people, who'd like to hear a story, they're engaged. Or at least they're listening. But if you say history, it's like, and like, you know, most of us are the same, if we're being honest, right? Most of us are in the roles that we're in because of the stories. They're the things that are important. And how you tell that story and how you offer that story, it's actually not in the instant. Telling is kind of one way of dealing with the stories. But I'd like to offer another perspective on that. And it leads to us offering the stories to our young people. Offering them as taonga, offering them as gifts that belong to their future almost more than ours. And I'll try and explain what I mean a little bit about that. What's worked for me is creating situations where our young people don't just sit there and listen to a story or watch my PowerPoints or engage with my clever educational techniques, but begin to see themselves in the story. And great movies, great exhibitions do exactly that. They bring something of the humanity to to the experience. And so in the recounting of histories and narratives, I'm 100% of the time looking to draw young people into those stories. And some of those stories I only tell out of my own relationships with people who are related to those stories. And sometimes I have to go back year in, year out, because things are shifting. We're in a big museum right now, but 50 years from now, there'll be whare toi. They won't be Pākehā institutions, they won't be council run or funded, Māori will have their own museums. So how do we set up what we do now to foster those kind of things? Vulnerability, and this is a hard one because, I came up through an education system that was all about being authoritative, know your stuff. And so you just stand and talk and people will be amazed at how much you know. And your qualifications, which you kind of put on the bottom of your PowerPoint. But with these stories, there's something else. We are not it. We are the conduits for the heroism, the bastardry of the people that went before us. Because in those stories is searchlights and floodlights that illuminate actually who we are as a country. And for young people, they're really wanting to know in their lives how to be able to navigate forward in a very shifting and changing environment. When I began my museum education career at Te Awamutu, I had the amazing opportunity. With a smaller museum, there's some freedoms. And one of the things that we were able to create was a New Zealand Wars program where young people could come, they could, in a safe space inside a museum, learn about history, hear the stories, but also get up really close to taonga. And some of those taonga were pretty, some of those taonga were directly from Rangiaowhia. Not necessarily behind a glass case, although the ones that needed to be were. But I saw a transformation in young people when we were able to bring out taonga. Some of them were replicas, but it didn't matter to them. And I know that's a real conundrum for us who are in the curatorial space. But it's got to be real. We can't have a replica. It's not real. Well, that might be for us, but for young people, their imaginations haven't been squashed yet, to the point where they can't look at something and go, well, it looks like the real thing. What are we doing? We're down there with I can't find an accession number on it. That sort of stuff. But when they can come up close to this taonga, something happens, something magical that I'm not smart enough to define. But there is a connection. And it's not for me to say what that connection is, because I'm sure it's a very complex thing. But what I have observed is that young people at that moment move from paralysis and fear to interest, to sometimes tactile experiences that translate into transformation inside, I think. And I am kind of telling you what I think is going on. But some comfort. And in a country where we've had generations and generations poisoned by misinformation or lack of it, we stand on, I think, a really amazing opportunity to make sure that these generations of young people aren't poisoned by that. Because they might not be poisoned by lack of information, but that lack of information, obviously, as we all know, and if you haven't listened to one ZB News Talk, you're welcome to. But, and I feel for a lot of out of our whānau around New Zealand who didn't get any information about Te Tiriti, get any information about, I was just reading, I was reading The Meeting Place over the last week. Man, those stories, you just read them and you just go, And a whole lot of people in Aotearoa would really, there'd be some real shifts in attitudes if they could just read some of these stories. Some of them aren't going to believe that, but that's okay. There's thousands of people. So our role as museum, as curators of story, as conduits of it, is really important, because there's few places that can provide the safety for stories, not just for us or not for our participants, but I wonder whether also museums are, although this is a really challenging thing to say, safe places also for at least tangata whenua to collaborate with us, or us with them, actually, or us get out of the way. let them tell the story. Great design, I think, in some of the exhibition stuff that I've been involved with. Like, I love that gallery upstairs that looks like it's a cartoon. Like it's a comic book. That's like inspired, because when that was installed and opened, I went to the opening because I just happened to work here. I got a free pass. Man, you could see the engagement with young people that were different to other galleries. That, it was designed because the story was actually accessible to them, because that's what we have to do. We have to try and look for ways to make, without losing the gravity of the story. And I think whoever did that gallery did an amazing job. Anyway, yeah, I'm just going to kind of move on a little bit because I'm out of time. The other thing that I think is really important for young people that I've noticed makes a difference to them is to tell them that they have a role. That the story actually isn't finished. And this is where we have to talk about that these experiences broke us, broke part of what was promised. And I admit to them, my generation, and I say this to classes, my generation hasn't fixed it. Who will fix it? They look at each other and they go, well, we're going to hand this to you. We're going to hand some of this unfixed stuff to you. And you should see them. They're like, oh yeah, we got it. I remember when Waimarama Anderson and Leah Bell visited Te Auckland Museum before the petition went to Parliament. They came to talk about what they were getting themselves into, and in terms of, not that we knew so much. But what I noticed about these two young women was, they're just really non-emotional about the whole thing. They were just not, there was no beating of the podium. They were just absolutely committed to the idea that this had to change. And you had government and the Ministry of Education saying, well, we just want to keep it, let schools choose what they're going to do. And for them, that wasn't good enough. And the reason is because they visited Orako. They had the story told to them. And the story went in them. And then they decided that everyone else needed to know, to fix something about us. And what happens next? Otauranga College students turn up on Parliament lawn. Who's behind them? Kingitanga. So I hear a lot of people talk about, we have to be careful how we tell the stories to young people. Well, they're actually a lot more hardy than we are. When we're saying that, we're often talking about parents. Crap our pants about what parents are going to think about what we tell them, They're actually our young people are really brave and really hardy, and they're ready for these stories. I just want to finish just quickly by saying that one of the things that has resonated with me in terms of these stories, Nigel, is the principle of mana taonga that's being developed, that the taonga have their own voice. And actually part of that is getting out of the way. And often when I'm with young people, I feel like, actually, I don't work for the National Library. I work for these young people. And how do I help, maybe not even build the bridge, but how do I show them the tools to make their own bridge with these stories? And just to finish, I just want to assert that actually we have to find ways to do what we do, so that our young people decide to take the story in their hands and carry it forward, so that, because otherwise, why would they? Well, if we don't make it relevant, why would they even care? Why would we, if they, we're the guardians of the story, be amazed, learn it, be able to recite it in an exam or in your conversations around the dinner table. We need to give it to them. And one day they'll tell us the story. And that will be interesting, won't it? But we'll be dead, as I said. Thank you very much.